This question looks very easy, but 80% of candidates solve it very wrong. So if you understand this, you are already ahead of most SQL candidates. So we have this table here. So this table basically contains phone logs, and we have the question. So the question reads, find callers whose first call and last call on the same day were made to the same recipient. So basically, we are finding the caller whose first call and last call was received, whose first call and last call was received by the same recipient in a particular day. So let's say, for example, in this date here, date one. So date one, we had a caller ID one, and caller ID one, the first call was received by recipient ID two, and the last call was received by recipient ID 4. So that means it doesn't qualify to answer our question because we only need a caller whose first call and last call were received by the same person. So the caller ID one is not qualified, and so we can proceed to the caller ID two in which date 5. Date 5 it ends here. Yeah, so we have date 5. Date 5 now we have caller ID 2 whose first call was received by recipient ID 5, and the last call was received by recipient ID 5. So that means this caller ID 2 meets the condition. So this caller ID 2 in the date 5 meets the condition. And then you will proceed to, let's proceed to this one. Date 1 of August ends here. So the first call received by recipient ID 3, and the last call was received by recipient ID 4. So this one doesn't qualify. And then we have, let's say the last one, date 2 of August. Date 2 of August, the first call was received by recipient ID 4, and the last call was received by recipient ID 4. So this one, you can see the recipient of the first call and the recipient of the last call was the same person in this particular day. So we're going to write a query so that you can get only the callers, only the caller whose last and first call were received by the same person in a particular date. So let's start. So we're going to write. So first of all, we're going to get the first recipient and the last recipient. So we're going to use window function to get the first recipient and the last recipient of each and every day. So we're going to write select caller ID, then date. So we can change this date format to, we can remove this time stamp so that you can just only remain with the date. So we can just write date called as, so we can call this as call call date. So we basically want to remain with the dates alone. We don't need the time. And then now you're going to use the window function. So there's a function called first value. So you're going to get the first recipient of the day and the last recipient of the day. So let's first of all get the first recipient. So we're going to use a window function called first value. So we're going to write first value, first value of recipient. Recipient ID. Then our partition by caller ID and this one that because we are finding the recipient, the first recipient of each and every day. So and then order by date. Yeah, and just order by date called. Yeah. And then we call this one as first recipient. And then we can also find the last recipient. So let's just copy this. Yeah. And then in the place of order by, we just use descending desk. And this one will give us the last recipient from our table here, which is phonelog. Yeah, so if we run this one will give us so you can see we're going to have the recipient, the first recipient and the last recipient of each and every day. So for example, in date one, the first recipient in date one, you can see the first recipient was 2 and the last recipient was recipient ID 4. Same to date 5. Let's look for date 5 here. So date 5, the first recipient was recipient ID 5 and the last recipient was ID 5. So for us to get the callers whose first and last call on the same day were made to the same recipient, that means the first recipient and the last recipient will be equal. So for that case, we can just write with let's call it CTE as this one bracket and then bracket, and then we add another query. Select. So you're finding the callers. So caller ID, and then call date from CTE here. CTE where the first recipient and last recipient are equal. So the first, let's just copy this. First recipient equals to the last recipient. Yeah, we can add distinct here so that we can get unique distinct. Yeah, so if we run this one will give us the correct answer. So it was caller ID 2 and caller ID, the caller ID 2 in date 5 and the caller ID 2 in date 2.